So I got to play Judas, the new game from the creator of Bioshock, Ken Levine. I also got to talk to the guy. So here in this video, I want to explain a little bit about what the game is, because it's been in the works for 10 years. We've been waiting for literally anything, so I figured this is a good time. Now, with the Friends Per Second podcast I do, we got to go to Ghost Story Games, see the operation, check out the game, and interview Ken Levine. That's like a 2-hour video, so if you want to hear explanations from him and we go in depth on a lot of weird stuff, definitely check that out. But I can distill down some of it here and describe some things for you. And if you do want to check it out, Skill Up, my buddy Ralph also did a video, as well as Jeff Keighley and IGN. We were the only people who got to check out this game, which is really weird. So thank you guys for watching, listening to the podcast. We can do something like this, but just know with this is that I got to see a very work in progress version of the game. The game is not finished yet, and this isn't even like a traditional press preview. So I can't make judgment calls on the game yet and say it's the best game ever or the worst game ever. It's way too early. I got to play about 5-ish hours of a work in progress, ultimately to just see what they're going for and then talk to Ken and ask Ken questions about it. So with all that being said, what is Judas? Well, Judas is Bioshock in space. Yes, that's been a lot of the conversation online, but a lot more, specifically because Ken Levine said to us, specifically after finishing Bioshock Infinite, he wanted to go into something smaller, but also more non-linear. He was a little bit frustrated by some of the setbacks with making linear games, that he wanted to kind of experiment with how game stories are told and how games play out. A few years after Bioshock Infinite, he did make headlines talking about narrative Lego, or how he was going to approach story and game design for his next game. And essentially, that is the main thing around Judas. Is how it's all structured, because it is a game where you have powers in one hand and a gun in the other, and you're in a weird, strange environment and you're doing Bioshocky type stuff. But it's the way the story goes down, the way the story affects the actual gameplay, and the types of games that it takes inspiration from that makes it stand out, to me at least. So here's where it's going to be very interesting for people one way or the other, is that it has roguelite elements, and it is according to their words, pseudo-procedurally generated. Now, this procedural generation, from what we could see and from what we got from Ken, isn't necessarily just to make the game longer or endlessly replayable. That is actually to serve how the story goes down and how your actions kind of affect things. Because this game, you're trapped on a big space station that's like a city. It's called the Mayflower. You are the character Judas, who did something wrong, kind of disrupted everything, and you're making your way through this adventure while being hounded by the big three. This is 3 characters that can kind of like hologram teleport into your peripheral view at any time. And they are characters that your character has a history with, and they are like very important people on this ship. Tom, voiced by Troy Baker, like the cop sheriff guy, is essentially responsible for security and safety on the ship. There's Nefertiti, who is a doctor and a biologist who was in charge of keeping people alive on the ship. And then there's Hope, who is in charge of kind of like the social stuff on the ship, therapy, matchmaking, stuff like that. These characters are a near constant presence, kind of like those few characters you would get to know from audio logs in the Bioshock games. But here, they are constantly teleporting in your vision. Where Johnny Silverhand in Cyberpunk would like zip up and teleport and like just be a static thing, these characters keep popping up in your view as you're moving around and you're playing. So you don't have to necessarily stop and sit and listen to a character talk through their dialogue. These characters will teleport, leaning up against a wall, teleport, continuing the conversation behind a door as it opens. And I think it's a really creative way to keep you playing while getting story and seeing these characters on screen acting and emoting and doing their thing. And that's the one thing I do want to hit on here, is that I came into this, and I said this on the podcast, but I came into this looking for interesting new storytelling stuff. I like the way Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite portrayed their stories, and you're getting that here. These characters are very expressive, kind of reminding me of Elizabeth, and they all have their own unique traits, motivations, and that's where things get interesting, because these 3 characters almost kind of act like 3 separate factions, but they're more like you're just worrying about the individuals and how you piss them off, whose missions you go choose to do, and the payback or the ramifications of favoring one person over another, because they're all squabbling, and essentially you're exposed to that all the time. And Ken and the people at Ghost Story are very excited about how all of this plays out, who you choose to embrace to get you through the ship and get you to Proxima. Now, each have their own story enticements and benefits that are interesting, but also these characters will tempt you throughout the game, being like, hey, I noticed you need this. If you come help me out on this next mission, I can give you this. And you're going to want things in the game, because I'll talk about in a little while how the gameplay goes down. Certain characters will also help you out in real time in the world, or actively discourage and screw you up during the game, like hopping on a turret to help you out, or locking a door and cutting off your escape and screwing you over in a second. All of these decisions and choosing to pursue which person and do what are all like very active things. They're not like a menu where you just like click saying screw you to a person or helping a person. Like, it's a little bit more just you playing. And that's where I found it really interesting. I still want to see how this is going to pan out long term, though. I've only gotten to see a small work in progress version of the game where things can change, and you only see the beginnings of those systems. But they're very excited about it, and I'm curious to see how it continues. The roguelite elements are there. When you die, you're like, oh shit. But I personally, and I said this in the podcast as well, like I felt like I was still getting a consistent playthrough. I felt like I was never set back significantly or held back from story or progress from dying. It's how it integrates some roguelite elements that are pretty interesting. And how that works with the gameplay is that it is very much like a Bioshock type of thing. Yes, like I said at the start, you see a character standing under like a pool of oil, you light the oil on fire, it sets that character on fire. Like, there is that stuff. You're hitting people with like a melee weapon. But I found resources to be pretty scarce, so I had to choose very selectively when I would use a gun for a powerful enemy, when I would stealth, yes, there is stealth, and when I would use my powers specifically. So it made me go into encounters thinking about a lot more other than just guns blazing. And I'm excited to see how that really pans out, how a high-level encounter will go down, because I only unlocked so many powers, I only had so many weapons, but just at the start, it did seem pretty cool. Like a little bit of a nod to like an immersive sim or an older school thing like a System Shock 2, but also very much a Bioshock thing. Now, the conserving resources thing was very interesting, and part of that is with the hacking. The hacking does take like expendable, consumable things, but I just liked the way it worked. The way it pops up on screen is very intuitive. You like essentially point at an enemy, press to hack them, and then you get, with the thumbsticks, you can move left and right to select two things, two actions, kind of like an if this, then that. So like, have this enemy target this enemy, or have this enemy go leak oil over here, or have this enemy kamikaze to this enemy, or have this enemy power down. Like, there were a lot of options I got to see pretty early on, and as much as I only scratched the surface with using them in scenarios, it seems like it could be pretty cool because it's very on the fly and very quick to use, but a lot of good commands at your fingertips, like once you get used to it. A pretty intuitive system. The game is kind of level design structured around a kind of overworld map where you will navigate to certain places to do things, and then this is where you jump into encounters, and the transport to get to those places is actually a big robot dog, which I really like. The dog kind of looks like an early 2000s, like that toy dog thing. Remember those? But very much a cool design, like with the cockpit and the snout and everything. And this dog is your main mode of transportation, but also like Judas's friend. The whole thing in this game is that Judas is a person who's not very good with real people and is better with machines, a programmer, a tinkerer, that type of character. And she does feel very distinct. Despite being a character in first person, I felt a stronger sense of character immediately with that person, more so than Bioshock, or definitely Bioshock Infinite. Environments were moody, dark, sometimes gross, sometimes scary, sometimes a little bit more glitzy, high sci-fi stuff. There are propaganda posters around you'll see in the gameplay. Like, you get to get glimpses of what is up with the weird society that was on this spaceship, the Mayflower, which interestingly enough was created by a super rich guy on Earth who used like AI and artificial intelligence and math to predict the end of the world. So he pooled all his money to build this whole thing. And then of course, things go south. But with things going south, it's pretty interesting that a lot of it seems to be centered around your player character, who has experienced amnesia. So like, you are kind of like uncovering things as it goes, I guess. And again, that creativity was something I kind of came into this looking for, someone behind System Shock 2, the creator of Bioshock, like their next thing. I was hoping to see some weird stuff. And for me, it was a lot with the enemy types, a lot of robotic enemies that all have like this weird cute, like they all have practical reasons for existing, but they all have this like cutesy veneer over them. Like the deputies are like robotic security sheriff robots, but then they're also like mechanical horses. Like they got this goofy look to them. Of course, like you've probably seen a lot. The chef, who looks like a big Italian chef with like a pizza cutter for an arm, very terrifying. There are also killer dentist chairs, dentist chairs with like a cute nurse face painted onto the headrest, but then it gets up and it's like holding a dead body and it tries to kill you. That stuff is really cool. That's the stuff I came looking for, and I'm happy to see that that is in full force. So with progression, there is roguelite stuff, like how to improve your character, get more, like another gun holster, stuff like that. But then there's also coming up with ideas in the game. Essentially, you are granted a way to work towards unlocking a new blueprint to craft a new weapon type or weapon modification. So she'll come up with an idea, and then you have an objective where it's like kill X amount of enemies doing this way, then you unlock that blueprint. So there are some crafting elements and like some like stuff you can collect for the crafting, some components that I didn't really feel too connected with, but the way the crafting at least worked with the blueprints and stuff, it just kind of keeps you playing and not really spending a lot of time in menus. And again, that comes to also the narrative stuff I talked about before with dealing with those big three characters and getting to know them and choosing things and how much to favor them while not actually sitting in a dialogue screen. Again, the gameplay stuff is early. I've only seen so much. I have questions about like high level play, how stealth will go, more enemy types, bosses, encounters and stuff like that. I can't make a call on yet because I haven't seen it. But at the very least, the ideas, the visual style, the uniqueness of it, the weirdness of it, that's where I like what I'm seeing. And if you want to hear more about those ideas, I do recommend listening to our podcast. I'll link it in the description down below, but Ken and the team have some big, weird ideas for the writing in terms of just society on a spaceship, yes, but like how things will splinter within and how there are different factions on this spaceship and their ideology, how public shaming kind of comes into all of this. He mentioned some of his inspirations for that. Lucy and him talked about a book. So like there's scenes you've seen in the trailer where like a character is being publicly shamed. There's that. Then there's of course the fact that like it's a ship full of machines and there are like, bigger ideas and questions around artificial intelligence. So it seems on the surface like it's tackling a lot, and I'm curious to see how it can handle the weight of all of those ideas. So essentially a non-linear kind of spiritual successor to a Bioshock with some roguelite elements and experimental storytelling. That's kind of what I was hoping to see. And it seems like they're doing that. Again, this is me distilling as much as I could down from our hands-on session and the really long conversation we had with Ken. So hopefully I caught you up to speed. That's about all the questions I can answer because again, the game is early, but at least now, after such a long time with him working on this game, with this team working on this game, we kind of know what Judas is. This game was revealed at the Game Awards with a trailer, but like its actual reveal now was done in an unconventional way with like the Friends Per Second and IGN talking about it with a long form conversation. That's interesting and different. And if you found that kind of interesting, that kind of insight interesting, thank you. Thanks for the feedback on the podcast and stuff like that. But I think I said everything I got from it. So hopefully you liked this video. Hopefully it helped. Clicking the like button does help. Thank you. But I do want to know what you think about Judas. What are your expectations? What are your experience with Ken Levine's previous games? What do you think about this kind of smaller scale but still big idea concept and concepts within Judas? Let's talk about this stuff, man. This did get me in the mood for a Bioshock playthrough, and maybe I'll finally make a video on that. But either way, let's talk about this stuff. Let me know. Thank you for watching. I'm Jake Baldino. See you guys next time. Subscribe because video games and pizza's on me.